In this video, we're going to introduce you to 4 plants that are culturally and practically significant in Europe, along with the interesting stories and fun facts behind them. Without further ado, let's get started. The apple is one of what are known as the world's 4 major fruits. It's also the fruit that Europeans are most familiar with. As early as 1500 BC, it had already spread throughout Europe. In the various belief systems of Europe, there are all sorts of stories about it. In Christianity, it's the forbidden fruit from the Garden of Eden that Adam and Eve secretly tasted. In ancient Greece, there was the tale of the golden apple, a contest between Athena, Aphrodite, and Hera to see who was the most beautiful goddess. In Norse mythology, apples were the elixir that granted the gods eternal youth. And in Celtic legends, applewood became the material for druid wands. It was even the temptation that Snow White couldn't resist in Grimm's fairy tales. In fact, up until the 17th century, the word apple was used by Europeans as a generic term for all kinds of fruit crops. Potatoes were called earth apples. Datura was called the thorn apple. Oranges were called Chinese apples, and apricots were called Armenian apples. Furthermore, in early Western paintings, whenever you saw a fruit bowl or a fruit basket, there was almost always an apple in it. But this fruit, which Europeans have given so much cultural meaning, didn't actually originate in Europe. The wild ancestor of the apple is the wild apple from Xinjiang. In ancient texts, fruits called Lincoln and Nai were also once considered to be apples. But Nai was actually a crab apple, and Lincoln was of poor quality. If eaten unripe, it was mealy and astringent, and if overripe, it became mushy and inedible. The fruit species most closely related to the modern cultivated apple is from the northern foothills of the Tian Shan Mountains near Almaty, Kazakhstan. And the original meaning of Almaty, basically apples were everywhere. But how exactly apples made their way to Europe is still a hot debate among academics. In terms of practical use, Europeans figured out long ago that there was more to do than just eat apples raw. Take baked apples. You cut the apple open, scoop out the core, then put in a filling with some butter or oil. After it's cooked, you're supposed to eat it while it's hot, but it's usually served with a cold drink or ice cream. For stewed apples, you cut them into chunks, add a ton of white sugar and butter, and cook them until they're soft and super sweet. Once they're ready, you can have them with yogurt bread or oatmeal as part of a healthy breakfast. You can also use them as an ingredient to make apple pudding or apple pie, or just mash them up completely to make applesauce. But Europeans didn't just eat apples. They also started trying to make alcohol with them pretty early on. Apple cider is the second most produced fruit wine in the world right after grape wine. The French like to have it as an aperitif, while in the UK and the US it's popular in cocktails. In Canada, they even make a special ice cider from frozen apples, and in recent years, apple cider vinegar has become a huge trend for weight loss. Figs are originally native to the Mediterranean and West Asia, and they've been cultivated for over 5,000 years. Along with grapes, olives, and dates, they're considered one of the 4 great fruits. The fig is a very complex fruit. Of course, you could also say it's a special kind of flower. A fig actually starts out as hundreds of tiny little flowers, all packed together inside a hollow receptacle. After pollination, these little flowers each develop into a tadpole-shaped individual. These are the actual fruits of the fig. And that outer part that looks like a piece of fruit is actually just the receptacle that encloses all those flowers. This magical plant that bears fruit without ever seeming to blossom has been given many symbolic meanings related to sexuality since ancient times. One of the most famous examples comes from the early Renaissance artist Masaccio's painting, The Expulsion from the Garden of Eden. Originally, the Adam and Eve in the painting were completely nude. Later, Cosimo III of the Medici family found it to be indecent and specifically ordered the figures' lower bodies to be covered with fig leaves. He wasn't just doing this for no reason. After all, in the Bible, after Adam and Eve ate the forbidden fruit from the tree of life, they did indeed use some fig leaves to cover themselves. Of course, figs don't actually just produce fruit out of thin air. Wild figs in nature need to rely on a specific species of fig wasp to carry out insect pollination. The female wasp enters through a tiny opening at the bottom of the fig, struggles her way inside the fruit, and after laying her eggs, dies inside the fig. It's said that this secretive method of pollination puzzled humans for a very long time. In the end, it was the youngest of the 3 great Greek philosophers, Aristotle, who solved the mystery through constant observation. Of course, these days, the figs we eat don't have any fig wasp bodies inside them. Those commercial fig varieties were modified long ago to only have female flowers. They only bloom with female flowers and can bear fruit without being pollinated. Back in the day, figs were known in Europe as the fruit of the gods. Fresh figs are sweet and juicy, and while they aren't easy to transport and store, they're one of the easiest fruits to dry. This greatly extended their shelf life, making them, before the arrival of industrial sugar, one of the most important natural sweeteners in Europe. Countless desserts relied on it as their main source of flavor. In the famous 14th century collection of recipes, The Form of Curry, there is a recipe for a sweet sauce called rapie. It's made by mixing wine with dried figs and raisins, and then adding various spices and sandalwood powder for color. After heating it for a while and before it cools, you mash it up with a mortar and pestle. After that, you add salt and flour, then put it back on the stove to heat. And once the excess moisture has cooked off, it's done. This sweet sauce was a great pairing for all kinds of bread or flaky pastries. Although its appearance isn't that appealing if you think about the process, it must have been delicious. I'd love to see someone recreate it. On top of that, figs had another big moment in the late 19th century. A Philadelphia baker named Charles Roser, a baker in Philadelphia named Charles Lozer, who was a huge fan of figs first, created a dessert called the Fig Newton. Well, the recipe was later bought by the famous Nabisco company, and once commercialized, it became a super classic snack, spawning more flavors like strawberry and raspberry, and it's still sold today. And back then, Nabis, the slogan chosen for it was, "A cookie is just a cookie, but a Newton is fruit and cake." The condescension was crystal clear. The olive as a plant is native to the Mediterranean coast. It's incredibly resilient. You can just stick a branch in the ground and it'll take root. That's why from Spain and Italy on the northern Mediterranean coast, to Greece and all the way to Tunisia, Libya and Egypt on the southern coast, people have been growing this plant for thousands of years. In Greek culture, the olive is considered a sacred tree. Back in the day, the goddess of wisdom Athena and the sea god Poseidon were competing to be the patron deity of the city of Athens. They each showed off their divine powers in front of the mortals. Poseidon struck a rock with his trident, and a massive surge of seawater burst forth. The people watched, trembling with fear, but Athena just gave a faint smile and gently tapped the ground with her spear. Then, from a crack in the rock, the world's very first olive tree began to grow. When the crowd saw this, they all knelt in worship and chose the elegant and beautiful young goddess. And on Noah's Ark, it was an olive branch in the beak of a white dove that brought Noah the news that the floodwaters had receded. This image of a dove holding a branch was later used again and again by the great Spanish master Picasso, cementing it as a symbol of peace. At the ancient Olympic Games, the victorious heroes were crowned with a wreath woven from olive branches. And at the site of the modern Olympic flame lighting ceremony, there stands an ancient olive tree. The green sashes worn by the priestesses are also a symbol of the olive branch. So in Europe, the olive tree has always been considered sacred and untouchable. The Romans prohibited the use of olive wood for fuel. King David of Israel even set guards to watch over the olive groves day and night. The olive tree has always been considered sacred and untouchable. The Romans prohibited the use of olive wood for fuel. King David of Israel even set guards to watch over the olive groves day and night. The ancient Greeks forbade the destruction of any fruit-bearing olive trees, even if they were being used by the enemy. But the Greeks were the most extreme about it. According to Aristotle's Constitution of the Athenians, anyone who dug up or cut down a sacred olive tree was sentenced to death. In practical terms, olives fall into two main categories. One is the oil olive used for extracting oil, and the other is the table olive for eating raw or pickled. The green olives we have in China are the latter type, while in the West, they have both kinds of olives, and there's a special ancient dish passed down from Greece and Rome that uses both of these types of olives, tapenade. Making tapenade starts with curing the olives. For your ingredients, you can mix semi-ripe green olives with fully ripe black olives. First, you gently crack the olives, then add salt, fennel, and a splash of olive oil. Finally, soak them in grape juice and vinegar for a few days and the curing process is complete. When you're ready to eat, pit and chop the cured olives. Add them to ground spices and then sprinkle some mint and fennel on top. Just mix it all together with olive oil. This simple paste, which manages to be both flavorful and nutritious, was a delicacy loved by all classes in ancient Rome. It was also the most common way they ate olives. compared to the three universally adored species we just discussed. The history of the potato in Europe is surprisingly short and complicated. The ancient peoples of the Andes on the other side of the ocean had actually been using a method of repeated freezing and sun-drying as far back as 7,000 years ago to make chuno, a dried potato that could be stored for a long time. But the potato didn't actually reach Europe until the Age of Discovery, in the early 16th century. The first people to present the potato to European royalty claimed it was a staple food of the Native Americans. They made similar arguments and really tried to sell the idea, but that kind of talk did little to convince the nobles. You see, Europeans were used to eating grains, so they had a hard time accepting a root that grew underground as a staple food. Besides, other plants in the nightshade family like the potato had always had a pretty scary reputation in Europe. For instance, datura, or thorn apple, is poisonous from root to leaf. Then there's the mandrake nicknamed the poisonous ginseng. Because its root looks eerily like a human, it was always closely associated with demons and witchcraft. So the potato was basically guilty by association and just couldn't catch a break. Supposedly, one of the only people to give it a try early on was Queen Elizabeth I of England. But as it turns out, the poor chef had no idea how to prepare it. He actually threw out the potatoes and cooked a dish with the leaves instead. And as you can imagine, everyone who ate it without exception ended up with food poisoning symptoms. This just reinforced the stereotype of the potato being barbarian food. For the next 100 years or so, about the only place you'd ever find them was in the ornamental gardens of the nobility. It wasn't until the 17th century that the Irish, who had suffered greatly at the hands of the English, discovered the potato's true value. The local climate in Ireland is damp and rainy year-round, which is perfect for growing potatoes. On top of that, the local farmers had precious little land to farm and were often going hungry. So people decided to plant potatoes and just see what would happen. When it came time to harvest, they were absolutely stunned. Holy cow, the yield was several times higher than oats or anything else. So it wasn't long before the potato became their staple food. When the English next door heard about this, they were basically ready for a good laugh. They were thinking, you're really going to take that weird-looking thing and eat it as your main food. There's no way that can be good for you. As a result, in 40 years, the population of Ireland literally doubled, and everyone was full of life with healthy, rosy complexions. This is what really put the potato on the map. But the Irish, who were the first to champion it, didn't meet a happy end. In 1845, a devastating wave of potato latte blight led to the Great Famine in Ireland. 1 million people died of starvation, and 2.5 million people boarded ships and headed for the Americas. This indirectly led to the creation of what is now America's second-largest ethnic group. Meanwhile, the popularization of the potato in France was largely thanks to a pharmacist named Parmentier. During the Franco-Prussian War, he was captured by the Prussians. While he was locked away in prison, the one meal that never changed was potatoes. So there Parmentier was in his cell dreaming of freedom when he noticed that his own stomach was actually starting to get a bit of a potbelly. Because of his profession, he realized the nutritional value of this food was something truly special. So after he was released from prison, he dedicated himself to recommending the potato to the French elite. Eventually, Napoleon took his advice, helping France emerge from the shadow of famine in the 18th century. To honor him, later generations even named a potato dish after him, which is called hachis parmentier. This episode is the start of a new series, and I'm not sure what you all think of this more human interest approach to a product's history. What do you think? If you liked it, please let me know. Next time we could do an episode on China.